she uncovered a hidden truth in her father's workshop that will haunt her forever. When Claire stepped into her father's workshop after his death, she expected to find nothing but dust and forgotten tools. She had always avoided this room, the place where her father spent countless hours tinkering, building, and fixing things. But now, standing alone in the space that once felt like home, Claire realized she wasn't just there to clean up, she was there to uncover something. Something that had been hidden from her for years, and what she found would leave her breathless, forever changing everything she thought she knew about her father and herself. Want to know the truth? Don't miss out on what happens next. Hit subscribe. Claire had always hated the workshop. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate her father's craftsmanship. He was an incredibly skilled carpenter, and she admired the work he did. It was more about the memories attached to that room. The smell of sawdust, the hum of the electric sander, the flickering light that always seemed to be just a little too dim. It all reminded her of a time before her father's decline, before the cancer. As a child, she'd often sat on a stool by the door, watching him create intricate wooden toys, beautiful furniture, and even the occasional shelf to hold her school books. But when Claire became a teenager, she distanced herself from the workshop. The place that had once felt like magic now felt suffocating, filled with echoes of a time she was no longer a part of. After her father's passing, the workshop stood untouched. The rest of the house had been cleared out, his clothes donated, his personal items sorted, but this one room, remained. Claire had avoided it, telling herself she was too busy, too caught up in the grieving process to face the memories of it. But now, months after the funeral, she couldn't put it off any longer. The house was finally sold. She was the last one left to clear the remnants of his life. The door creaked open with a familiar groan, and Claire felt a chill run through her spine. The light was still dim, the air still thick with the scent of old wood and rusting metal. It was as though nothing had changed since her father had last been there. But there was something in the stillness that unsettled her. She closed the door behind her, and the room felt smaller, more confined than she remembered. A large workbench ran along one wall, covered in tools she had no idea how to use. On the opposite side, several shelves were lined with half-finished projects, broken chairs, unfinished picture frames, and a heap of wood cuttings and scrap pieces. The clutter was overwhelming, but it wasn't what caught her attention. It was the box in the corner. The box. It had never been there before. She was sure of it. It wasn't big, just a small wooden chest, roughly the size of a shoebox, its surface worn and scratched, as though it had been pushed around for years, but it was hidden behind a pile of wood and sawdust, just barely visible. Claire walked over to it, her steps cautious. Her heart began to race, the sense of something being off growing stronger with every movement. She crouched down and brushed aside the debris that covered the box. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it, noticing how surprisingly heavy it was for its size. The wood was sturdy, old, and the edges had been smoothed over time. There was something almost familiar about it, but Claire couldn't place why. She flipped the latch, the metal catching a ray of sunlight that streamed through the dusty window. The chest creaked open, revealing its contents. Inside, there were papers, old yellowed pieces of parchment, crumpled photographs, and a few small, odd trinkets, things Claire didn't recognize, But it wasn't the object that made her freeze, it was the letter. A folded piece of paper, stained and aged, with their father's unmistakable handwriting on the outside. Claire's pulse quickened. She had never seen him write anything like this. Slowly, she opened the letter, the words blurred by time but still legible. To Claire, my daughter, I hope you never have to read this. I hope you never find it. But if you do, know that I did it to protect you. There are things in our past that are better left untouched. Things that you don't need to know. Please, my dear, let this go. Her breath caught in her throat. The weight of the words hit her like a physical blow. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. She read the note again, this time more slowly, trying to make sense of what she was reading. What did he mean? What had he done? And why had he hidden this letter here in the very room where they used to spend hours together? Claire's mind raced, the pieces of her father's life beginning to unravel in front of her. What was so important, so dangerous that he felt the need to hide it from her? What truth had he kept from her all these years? For the first time in a long time, Claire felt something she hadn't felt since her father's death. Fear. Not the fear of losing him. That was long gone. But the fear of what she might find next. Claire sat there, the letter trembling in her hands, as though it was about to slip from her grip and disappear into the dust. She wanted to understand it, to decipher the meaning of her father's cryptic words. Things in our past that are better left untouched. What could he have meant by that? What could possibly be so terrible that he had gone to such lengths to shield her from it? The letter didn't answer any of her questions. It only deepened the mystery, the questions multiplying faster than she could process them. She sat motionless for a long moment, the silence of the room pressing in on her. The smell of aged wood and metal filled the air, and the only sound was the soft ticking of a clock somewhere in the house. But Claire didn't hear it. Her mind was lost in a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. Finally, she stood up, clutching the letter to her chest. Her hands were still shaking, but she didn't care. She couldn't just leave this room without answers. There had to be more. There had to be something else in this workshop that could explain why her father had hidden this from her. She turned her gaze to the far corner of the room, where an old cabinet stood. It was massive, covered in dust and cobwebs, and Claire had always assumed it was just another piece of forgotten furniture, another relic of her father's hobby that had fallen out of use. But something about it felt different now. It didn't belong, just like the box. It was too out of place, too carefully hidden. Taking a deep breath, Claire walked toward it, her footsteps light, as though not wanting to disturb whatever secrets the room held. She reached for the cabinet's door, her fingers brushing against the worn handle. It was locked. Her heart skipped a beat. Her father had never been one for locks. He had always been so open, so straightforward. Why would he lock something away in this room? Claire felt a surge of determination. She had come too far to turn back now. She rifled through the tools on the nearby workbench, her fingers searching for something to break the lock. Her mind raced, replaying the letter again and again. The message was clear. There was something hidden in this house, something that had to remain buried. But her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She needed to know. She had to know. After a few moments, she found what she was looking for, a small crowbar, the end of it sharp and strong enough to pry open the cabinet. Her hands, still trembling, gripped it tightly, and she forced the tool into the crack between the door and the frame. There was resistance, but with one final push, the lock broke and the cabinet door swung open with a groan. Inside, there was a thick leather-bound notebook. It wasn't much to look at, just a plain journal with a simple clasp that seemed to call to her. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for it, pulling it from the shelf as though it might vanish the moment she touched it. The notebook was heavy, as if it had been written in for years. Claire opened it carefully, turning the pages one by one. Each page was filled with her father's neat handwriting, filled with calculations, measurements, and designs. At first, it looked like just another of his projects, something he had been working on before his health had taken a turn for the worse. But as she read on, the entries became darker. The numbers were no longer about wood or tools, but about people, names, addresses, and cryptic references to meetings and deals. Claire's heart began to race again. What was this? Why hadn't she ever known about this side of her father? The last page she turned to was the most unsettling of all. It was dated just a month before his death. It read, "It's done. I've paid my debt, but the truth will never be told. Not to Claire. She must never know. She is better off not knowing the cost of my mistakes. I will protect her, even if it means hiding the truth from her forever." Claire's hands dropped the notebook in shock, the words blurring before her eyes. The weight of what she had just uncovered was unbearable. Her father's final words were a confession. He had done something terrible. But what? And why was he willing to go to such lengths to keep her from finding out? The room spun around her. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, each thump louder than the last. Her father, the man who had been her hero, the one she had admired and trusted with all her heart, had kept this secret from her. He had betrayed her in a way she couldn't even begin to understand. But as Claire sat there, trying to make sense of it all, a sudden thought cut through her confusion. There was one more thing in this room, one more place she hadn't checked. The attic. She had never been allowed up there as a child. Her father always claimed it was too dangerous, too cluttered. But now, Claire couldn't help but wonder if there was something hidden there as well. Something her father had kept from her even longer. The attic door was in the corner of the workshop, above a set of stairs leading to a narrow hallway. It was shut tight, covered by a dusty sheet that hung from the ceiling. Claire stood, her legs weak, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had come this far. There was no turning back now. With a deep breath, Claire made her way toward the stairs. The attic door was small, almost hidden beneath the shadows of the room. Claire had walked past it countless times, never giving it more than a passing glance. But tonight, everything felt different. The air in the workshop was thick, charged with an energy she couldn't explain. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover what had been hidden for so long. She reached for the handle, feeling the cold metal under her fingertips. The door creaked open with a sound that echoed in the silence of the workshop. It was an eerie, unsettling noise, like the house was protesting her intrusion. The stairs leading up to the attic were steep, narrow, and covered in a thick layer of dust. As Claire ascended, she could feel the weight of the house pressing down on her, as though it were trying to keep her from moving forward. The air grew colder the higher she climbed, and the smell of old wood and forgotten things filled her lungs. At the top of the stairs, Claire hesitated. The attic was dim, lit only by a single bulb that flickered above her head. The floor was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and piles of yellowed newspapers. Nothing out of the ordinary. But her instincts told her that something was waiting here, something she wasn't supposed to find. She took a step into the attic, the creaky floorboards groaning beneath her weight. The beam of light from the bulb illuminated the dust particles swirling in the air, giving the space an almost surreal, dreamlike quality. But there was nothing magical about it. The room was heavy with secrets. She started to look through the boxes, opening them one by one. Most were filled with old clothes, old books, and trinkets that no longer seemed important. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that felt like it could explain the strange, creeping sensation in her chest. But then her eyes landed on something. In the far corner of the attic, beneath a tarp that had been hastily thrown over it, was a large wooden chest. It was old, much older than anything else in the room, and covered in layers of dust. The chest was not just a container, it was a piece of her father's past, one that had been deliberately hidden from her. The tarp was heavy, but Claire didn't hesitate. She pulled it away, revealing the chest in full. Her breath caught in her throat. The chest wasn't just old, it was familiar. Too familiar. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. It was the same style as the box she had found in the workshop, the one her father had hidden with the letter. She couldn't believe it. How had she not seen this before? With shaking hands, Claire knelt down in front of the chest and reached for the lock. Unlike the cabinet in the workshop, this one wasn't locked. The clasp clicked open easily, and as she lifted the lid, a rush of cold air seemed to escape from within, as though the chest had been holding its breath all this time. Inside, there were more papers, more photographs, more of the same. But among the clutter, one photograph stood out. It was an old black and white photo, faded with time. In it, a young man, her father, though much younger, stood next to a woman she didn't recognize. They were smiling, their arms around each other, in front of what looked like an old run-down house. It wasn't until Claire looked closer that the blood drained from her face. The woman in the photograph was holding a baby. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned the photo over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, were the words, "Lena and I, before everything fell apart. Our son, your brother, died before his second birthday." Claire's vision blurred. She stared at the words, unable to comprehend what she had just read. Her brother? A son? She had no memory of a brother, no recollection of ever hearing about one. Why had her father never told her? Why had he kept this from her all these years? The truth crashed into her like a tidal wave. She had always known there were parts of her father's past that had been buried, but this was something else entirely. Her entire life had been built on a lie, and she had never even suspected it. Claire's hands trembled as she pulled out more papers from the chest. One was a birth certificate. Her father's name was listed as the father, but the name of the child was different from hers. She didn't recognize it. There were medical records detailing the short life of her brother, the baby who had died when he was just a toddler. Her heart twisted as she read the words, learning about the sickness that had taken his life. The child her father had lost so many years ago had never been mentioned to her, never spoken about in the house. She felt sick, betrayed. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Why had he kept this from her? Why had he erased her brother from her life? Her breath quickened, her chest tightening with the weight of this discovery. She had to know more. She had to understand why. But before she could process any further, a noise broke the stillness of the attic. A soft, almost imperceptible creak. Claire froze. It came from behind her, near the stairs. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She wasn't alone. Someone was upstairs with her. The creak of the floorboard echoed in the attic, sending a chill down Claire's spine. Her heart leapt in her chest, and for a moment time seemed to slow. She felt as though she were trapped in a moment she couldn't escape from. The shadows of the attic, once comforting in their silence, now seemed to close in around her. She held her breath, listening. The air was still, save for the faint rustling of old papers and the sound of her own heartbeat, which was now hammering in her ears. It wasn't the wind, she knew that. The noise had come from the far corner of the attic, just behind the stairs. Slowly, Claire turned around, her movements hesitant, as though any sudden motion might provoke whatever or whoever was behind her. But there was nothing. The attic remained empty, save for the piles of forgotten things, the boxes of her father's life, the chest with its disturbing contents, and another creak. This time it was louder. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She was certain now. She wasn't alone. Her pulse quickened, the fear creeping up her throat, making it hard to swallow. She wasn't the only one who knew about this attic, about what had been hidden here. The presence of whoever or whatever was lurking in the shadows was undeniable now. Claire's hand instinctively reached for the edge of the chest, her fingers brushing the papers as if they could offer some kind of shield, but deep down, she knew it was pointless. The secrets of the past were coming for her, and she couldn't outrun them. A soft voice, barely a whisper, reached her ears. Claire. The sound of her name, spoken so softly, almost made her knees buckle. It wasn't her father's voice. It wasn't even a voice she recognized. It was strained, as though it had been waiting a long time to speak. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure if she wanted to turn around or if she wanted to run for the stairs and escape from the nightmare that was slowly unfolding. Claire, don't. Please don't. The voice came again, barely audible, like a memory trying to reach through time. She spun around, her eyes scanning the shadows, her breath shallow. The attic was still empty, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was there. Her gaze landed on a stack of boxes near the far wall. Something was moving, not visibly, but just enough to suggest that the shadows were alive in a way she couldn't explain. "Who's there?" Claire's voice trembled, the words barely escaping her lips. The cold in the room had deepened, and she felt a sudden pressure in her chest, as though the air was thickening, pressing against her, pushing her to the brink of panic. There was a rustling sound, a faint scrape of something sliding across the floor. It was coming from the corner, from behind the boxes. Claire's body tensed, her instincts screaming at her to leave, to run as fast as she could, but her legs refused to move. Her heart raced and her mind buzzed with questions. Was it someone else in the house? Had someone followed her up here? Or was this something far worse? The rustling stopped, and then suddenly the silence was broken by a loud thud. Claire gasped, her heart nearly leaping from her chest. She looked toward the source of the noise. The box closest to her had fallen, its contents spilling out onto the floor. Among the scattered papers and broken trinkets, Claire saw something that made her blood run cold. It was a photograph, much like the one she had found earlier in the chest downstairs. This one, though, was different. In it, her father was not standing alone, nor was he with the woman Claire had seen before. This photograph showed her father in the company of a man. The man's face was obscured by shadow, but the connection between him and her father was unmistakable. They were smiling, but it was a cold smile, a smile that didn't reach their eyes. It was a picture of something secret, something hidden. The photograph slid across the floor toward her, stopping just a few inches from her feet. As Claire picked it up, the weight of the moment hit her all at once. There was something about this image, something about the way the two men were standing, close, too close, and how they were looking at her father that made her stomach churn. This was no ordinary photograph. Her fingers shook as she turned it over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, were the words, "The man who knew everything, and the man who would never tell her the truth." Claire's hands went numb. The words burned through her mind, and suddenly, everything she thought she knew about her father, about her family, began to unravel. The attic seemed to close in around her. The shadows no longer felt like simple darkness. They felt alive, like they were closing in on her, suffocating her, drawing her deeper into the mystery that had haunted her father's life for years. The voice that had whispered her name earlier suddenly grew louder. "Claire, you have to know. You have to understand before it's too late." Claire's knees gave way beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor. The photograph slipped from her hands, and the attic grew darker still. She felt a cold presence behind her, someone looming in the shadows. She couldn't breathe, but the voice, though distant, was clear. "Find the truth, Claire, before the past finds you." Claire's heart raced in her chest, her breathing shallow as the cold presence in the attic pressed in around her. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to escape, but the weight of the photograph, the message on the back, the voice in the shadows, none of it would let her go. She could feel the walls of the attic closing in, the darkness growing thicker, more oppressive with each passing second. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the voice, the thing that was calling to her. But there was nothing, just the shadows, the boxes, and the heavy silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. The only sound was her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears. The voice came again, clearer this time, but it wasn't coming from behind her. It wasn't coming from the shadows at all. It was coming from inside her head. "You found the pieces, Claire. You've uncovered the truth, but you don't know everything yet. There's one more thing you need to see." Her knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor. She couldn't take it anymore. The weight of it all, the lies, the secrets, the father she thought she knew, the brother she never knew existed, it was too much. "Why?" she whispered into the emptiness. "Why didn't you tell me, Dad? Why didn't you trust me enough to know?" The attic seemed to hold its breath as she sat there, her face buried in her hands. And then, for the first time since she entered the house, the air around her began to shift. It was subtle at first, just a soft rustling sound like the movement of paper in the breeze. Then the rustling became louder, more frantic, as if something was pulling at the walls themselves. Claire looked up, her heart pounding in her chest. Her eyes locked onto a small drawer built into the side of the attic wall, half hidden beneath a pile of old fabric. She hadn't noticed it before, but now it was impossible to ignore. The drawer was slightly ajar, as though it had been waiting for her to find it. Shaking, Claire crawled toward it, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and anticipation. She opened the drawer slowly, the sound of wood scraping against wood filling the attic. Inside, there was nothing but a small, leather-bound book. It looked ancient, worn with age, but it was clearly important, more important than anything she had found so far. With a deep breath, she lifted the book from the drawer, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was heavier than it should have been, and the leather seemed to resist her touch, as though it didn't want to be opened. But Claire had come this far. She couldn't stop now. She opened the cover, and the first page revealed a name, Lena, the woman in the photograph, her mother. But the name meant something entirely different now. Claire's blood ran cold as she read the first few lines, realizing this book was more than just a journal. It was a ledger, a record of deals, of names and dates. Names she recognized from the photo in the attic, the same man from the picture with her father. Her hands went still. The ledger continued. There were notes about secret meetings, about favors owed, and the name of someone who had been paid to keep quiet, paid to disappear. And then, in the last entry, there was a single line that stopped Claire's heart. The debt is paid, but the price was too high. Her mind reeled. A debt? What kind of debt? And who had her father been dealing with? The name Lena was everywhere in the ledger. This woman wasn't just a part of Claire's past. She had been a part of something much darker, something that had swallowed her father whole. The voice returned, clearer now, as though it were standing beside her. You don't understand yet, Claire, but you will. A sudden rush of images flooded her mind. Her father, a man she thought she knew, standing in the shadows of that old house, whispering to Lena, a conversation Claire was never meant to hear. A promise made, a secret kept, the debt that would haunt them all. And in the center of it, a child, the baby who had died. But what if the child hadn't died? What if that was the secret? The thought struck her like lightning. Claire's hands went numb as she turned the pages of the ledger, desperately searching for more clues, more answers. Her breath caught as she reached the final page. There, at the very bottom, was a name, Jacob, the name of her brother, the son who had died before his second birthday. But beneath it, in her father's handwriting, was something that made Claire's blood run cold. Jacob is not dead. He never was. Claire's entire body went rigid, her mind racing. The room felt as though it was spinning out of control. How could this be? How could her father, how could anyone, keep such a secret from her? The truth was unbearable. Her father had lied to her. He hadn't just hidden the fact that she had a brother. He had faked his death. He had sent his son away, hidden him, and kept him from Claire for her entire life. The truth was worse than anything Claire could have imagined. Her brother hadn't died. He had been erased. Tears welled up in her eyes as the realization hit her. Jacob was still out there. The sound of footsteps broke through the silence. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. Claire stood up, the book still in her hands, and turned to face the source of the sound. The shadows shifted once more, and a figure appeared in the doorway. Her father. But it wasn't him. Not really. The man standing before her was not the father she had known. His eyes were cold, calculating, and they locked onto hers with a look of finality. "You were never meant to find out," he said, his voice a low, chilling whisper. Claire's heart slammed against her chest as the figure of the doorway stepped closer. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. The man before her, he looked like her father, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no love, no recognition, only coldness, only something far darker. The shadows in the attic seemed to shift, to move around him, as though they were clinging to him, protecting him. Claire's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out everything else. Her grip on the leather-bound book tightened, the weight of it a sharp reminder of everything she had uncovered. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and guttural. It was her father's voice, but not the voice she remembered. This one was empty, devoid of all the affection she once knew. "Why?" she gasped, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me the truth? About Jacob, about everything." Her father, no, not her father, not anymore, stepped further into the attic. His movements were slow, deliberate, almost as if he were savoring the fear in her eyes. "I didn't tell you, Claire, because it was never meant to be told." His voice was quiet, but the words hit her like a punch. "There are things in this world that should remain buried, things that, if you find them, will destroy you. You're not ready for the truth." Her breath caught in her throat. "What truth? That I had a brother who never died? That you lied to me for my entire life?" "Not just lied," he said, his lips curling into a thin, sinister smile. "Protected." "Protected?" Claire's anger surged, her fists clenching around the book. Protected from what? A brother? A family? Or is it something darker? What was so bad, so dangerous that you had to keep it from me? For the first time, his expression faltered, his eyes flashing with something, fear, regret. It was gone too quickly for Claire to understand, but it was there, in that brief moment, something that made her realize the man in front of her was not the person she had spent her whole life believing he was. "You were safer not knowing," he said, his tone icy. "Jacob was never supposed to be a part of your life. His existence, it was never supposed to interfere with your future." "Then why didn't you just tell me?" Claire shouted, her voice breaking with the force of her emotions. "Why keep me in the dark? Why keep him hidden from me like some kind of secret? I deserve to know. I deserve the truth." Her father? No. The man who had once been her father took a step forward, and Claire instinctively took a step back. The air in the attic grew heavier, colder, and for the first time in her life, Claire felt truly afraid of him. "You think you can handle the truth?" he sneered. "You think you're ready for what lies ahead? What he is capable of? Jacob isn't just a child, Claire. He's something else. Something we created together. Something we had to create. And now, the debt has come due." Claire's stomach churned. "What do you mean, the debt has come due?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What debt? What did you do?" Her father smiled again, but this time it was twisted, cruel. "What I did," he said slowly, each word deliberate, "was save you. From him. From the truth." She couldn't breathe. The weight of his words, the tension in the room, it was too much. Claire's head swam as the pieces of the puzzle, the fragmented images of her past, began to form a picture far darker than she could have imagined. The truth was not just about Jacob. It was about something her father had been a part of, something larger, something that had haunted their family for years, and Claire had been a part of it, whether she knew it or not. The man's face softened slightly, and for a brief moment, he almost seemed human again. I never wanted you to know what he was capable of, what he could do, but you had to know. You had to understand that keeping him in the shadows was the only way to protect you. Protect me? Claire's voice cracked. From what? Who is Jacob really? The man's smile faded, his eyes hardening again. That, he said, his voice low, is not something you can comprehend. Not yet. Claire could feel the ground beneath her shift, as though the entire attic were tilting, the walls closing in. She felt suffocated by the weight of everything she had uncovered, everything that was still hidden from her. But there was no more running, no more pretending. She had come too far to turn back. She raised the book, holding it in front of her, as if it were a shield. "You've already told me enough," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "I don't care about your debt. I don't care what you think I'm not ready for. I'm not afraid of the truth anymore. I need to know what happened to Jacob, what happened to me." For a long moment, her father, or whatever he was now, didn't speak. His eyes flickered to the book in her hands, then back to her face. It was as if he were calculating something in his mind, weighing his options. Finally, his lips parted, and his voice was almost a whisper. "It's too late, Claire. You can't change the past. You can't undo what we did. But if you truly want to know..." Claire stepped forward, her heart pounding. "I do." Her father's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a trace of sorrow. "Then find him. Find Jacob before it's too late. He's out there, and he's not who you think he is. He's not a child, not anymore. You have to stop him before he comes for you." Claire's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? What's he gonna do?" But before her father could answer, the shadows in the attic seemed to flicker, and with a final chilling glance, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. The room fell silent once more, but now there was no longer any question. There was only one thing Claire knew for certain. The truth was no longer just a burden. It was a threat. Claire stood alone in the attic, the air thick with the remnants of the conversation, her father's final words echoing in her mind. Find him. Find Jacob before it's too late. The words haunted her, the weight of them pressing down on her like a stone. There was no turning back now. The shadows in the attic no longer felt like an old house's forgotten corners. They felt like something alive, something that was watching her. The silence was deafening, and the book in her hands, now closed, felt heavier than ever. Everything about this moment felt like it was teetering on the edge of something dark, something dangerous. Jacob, her brother, the brother she had never known, the brother who had died, or so she had been told. But now everything she had believed was a lie. "Jacob is not dead," the ledger had said. He was never dead. The revelation made her head spin. She had spent her entire life thinking she had lost a brother, a sibling she never got to know. But the truth was worse than that. Jacob hadn't been lost. He had been hidden. And now it seemed that the truth about him was far darker than she could have imagined. She had to find him. She had to understand why her father had gone to such lengths to erase his existence from her life, why he had lied to her for so long. But where would she even start? Her mind raced. Her father had said Jacob was not a child anymore. What did that mean? Was he a man now? A stranger? The thought of him out there somewhere, living with a truth that Claire couldn't even begin to comprehend, made her blood run cold. But the clock was ticking. Her father's warning before it's too late kept reverberating in her mind. She couldn't waste any more time. With trembling hands, Claire grabbed a leather-bound book from the floor and opened it once again. The pages fluttered beneath her fingers as she desperately searched for anything that might give her a clue, any hint of where Jacob might be or what had happened to him after everything had fallen apart. She reached the last few pages where her father had written something more cryptic than anything else. He is out there. The one who raised him has taken him far away, where you can never follow. The words felt like a punch to her gut. Who had taken him? And why? And why had her father, in all his cryptic warnings, never once mentioned this person, the one who raised him? The phrase echoed through her mind as though it held the key to everything she needed to know. Who are you? Claire whispered to the empty room, but no answer came. Her father had been protecting her, hiding the truth to keep her safe, but now the lie was unraveling and the danger had become real. It's too late, Claire. You can't change the past. Her father's voice, once full of authority and love, had now become a harbinger of doom. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since that moment in the attic. Hours? Minutes? The weight of everything was making her feel like she was drowning. But one thing was clear. If she wanted to find Jacob, if she wanted to know who he had become, what had happened to him all these years, she had to leave the house. She had to leave everything behind and follow the only lead she had. With newfound determination, Claire walked out of the attic, the door creaking shut behind her. She descended the stairs slowly, her footsteps quiet against the wooden floors, her mind racing with every possible scenario. Her phone was on the counter. She grabbed it and pulled up the search bar, her fingers moving faster than her thoughts. The one thing her father had never told her, who had taken Jacob, was the very thing she needed to know. But it wasn't something Claire could figure out on her own. She needed help. She needed to find someone who might know, someone who could help her track down the truth. Her fingers hovered over the search bar, and then, without thinking, she typed in the only name that had appeared in the ledger, Lena. The screen loaded, and Claire's heart skipped a beat when the first result popped up. It was a news article. Missing person, Lena Harper, 1992. Case unsolved. Her breath caught in her throat. The article detailed the mysterious disappearance of a woman named Lena Harper, who had vanished nearly 30 years ago. The picture was grainy, but the woman's face was unmistakable. This was the same woman in the photograph with her father. This was the woman he had kept hidden from Claire. The article mentioned Lena's connections to several criminal organizations, groups known for working in the shadows, for doing anything to keep their secrets buried. It wasn't long before Claire's eyes scanned down the page to the most shocking part of the article. Lena had been linked to a man known only as the Architect. Her hands froze. The Architect? Claire had never heard that name before, but something about it felt significant, like the name of someone who could pull the strings of an entire operation, someone who could control everything from the shadows. As she scrolled further, her mind racing, she found the connection between the Architect and Lena's disappearance. They were both tied to a series of dark underground events, and at the very end of the article, there was a chilling sentence that made Claire's blood run cold. It is believed that Lena Harper's child, who was thought to be dead, was actually taken by the architect and raised in a secret location. Claire stumbled back, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The child, her brother, Jacob. The pieces were coming together. But this was just the beginning. She had more questions than ever. Who was the architect? What had they done to Jacob? And most terrifying of all, was he still alive? The clock was ticking, and Claire knew one thing for certain. She had to find Jacob before whatever darkness her father had tried to keep her from caught up with her. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in around Claire. She stared at the glowing screen of her phone, her mind buzzing with the horror of the discovery she had just made. The architect. The name, like an ancient curse, echoed in her mind, and every part of her screamed that she was only scratching the surface of something far darker than she could have imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest. She had learned more in the last few hours than she ever could have prepared for. Lena Harper, the woman from the photograph, the mother of the brother she never knew, had been part of something monstrous, and Jacob, her long-lost sibling, was at the center of it all. The architect had taken him, raised him in secret, kept him hidden from the world for years. But why? What was the purpose of all this, and why had her father been involved in it? Claire's fingers trembled as she typed the name, the architect, into the search bar again, this time adding words like child, secret, criminal. She had to find out everything. She couldn't leave any stone unturned. Her only lead was the name, but it seemed like a dead end. The search results were scarce. No clear answers, just vague references to underground dealings, shadowy organizations, and stories of a man whose influence reached farther than she could understand. But then she found something. It was an old forum thread, buried deep in the search results. A thread titled, "The Architect, a Shadow Behind Everything." It was a dark, encrypted corner of the internet, filled with cryptic messages, obscure references, and testimonials from people who had crossed paths with him. As she clicked on the link, Claire's stomach dropped. The first post in the thread was from someone claiming to have escaped the influence of the architect. Their post was fragmented, but Claire could make out enough to know this was the person she needed to talk to. The post read, "I don't know who you are or why you're asking about him, but if you've heard of the architect, you're already too deep. He doesn't just control people, he molds them. His influence reaches farther than you think. People like Lena Harper, they're nothing more than pawns in a game that never ends. If you want to find him, you need to understand that what you're looking for isn't just a man, it's an idea, an organization, and the one thing the architect never lets go of is his children." Claire's heart skipped a beat. Children. It was a word that struck her in a way she couldn't explain. What did it mean? Had Jacob been part of something more sinister than just a stolen childhood? Had he been raised to become a weapon? The rest of the post was full of warnings about people disappearing, about enemies being made, but one thing was clear. The architect was not just someone Claire could confront on her own. This was bigger than her, bigger than any family secret she had uncovered. This was a network, a power that controlled more than just lives. It controlled destinies. A chill ran through Claire's veins as she closed the phone. She couldn't do this alone. She needed help. The voice in her head, the warning that had plagued her since finding that letter, was louder now than ever before. You have to stop him. Find Jacob before it's too late. But where do you go when you're up against an organization like this? When you're up against a shadow that has controlled everything for so long? Claire couldn't answer that. But one thing she knew, she had to find the answers. She had to find Jacob. The clock was ticking. The next morning, Claire packed her bag, her head spinning with everything she had uncovered. She couldn't stay at the house. It was no longer a home. It was a prison filled with lies. Every room she walked through felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. She left, not knowing exactly where she was going, but knowing that she couldn't keep running from the truth anymore. Her phone buzzed as she walked toward her car, and she looked down to see a message from an unknown number. I know who you're looking for. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the message. Meet me at the old pier, 10 p.m. tonight. Bring the book. You're gonna need it. It was a cryptic message, a final clue, and it was all she had. Claire had no idea who this person was, but she had no choice. This was her chance to finally get the answers she needed. She didn't hesitate. She hit the accelerator and drove toward the pier, the sun sinking lower in the sky as the weight of everything she had uncovered pressed down on her. By the time she arrived, the pier was eerily quiet, the sound of the waves lapping against the dock, the only noise breaking the stillness. Claire stepped out of her car, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. The sky was clouded, the wind biting at her skin as she clutched the leather-bound book tightly in her hand. The shadows on the dock seemed to shift, and then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged. A tall man, dressed in a long coat, his face obscured by the hood pulled low over his head. Claire couldn't make out his features, but she felt the weight of his presence as he approached. You came, the man said, his voice low and rough. You're brave, or stupid. I can't decide. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Who are you? He stepped closer, his eyes gleaming from beneath the hood. I'm someone who knows what the architect is capable of, and I'm someone who knows where Jacob is. Her heart leapt in her chest. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Tell me everything, Claire demanded, stepping forward. Tell me where he is. What happened to him? What is the architect? The man paused, his gaze lingering on the book in her hands. I can tell you where he is, he said slowly, but you need to understand something. The architect is not just a man, he's an empire. And Jacob, he's not the same boy you knew. He's not even human anymore. Claire's blood ran cold. I need to know, she whispered, her voice trembling. The man took a step back, his expression unreadable. Then get ready to lose everything. Claire's mind raced as she stared at the man before her, his words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Jacob's not the same boy you knew. He's not even human anymore. The statement sent a shiver down her spine, and for the first time in this whole twisted journey, she felt the full weight of the danger that lay ahead. She clenched her fists around the leather-bound book, its pages filled with secrets that had already shattered her reality. She had come so far, but now, standing on the edge of a terrifying abyss, she realized that the truth she had been chasing might be more than she could bear. Tell me what you mean, Claire said, her voice unwavering despite the terror creeping into her chest. What happened to Jacob? What did the architect do to him? The man stepped closer, his face still hidden beneath the hood. For a moment, he said nothing. Instead, he glanced at the book in her hands, a knowing look in his eyes. Jacob was part of something much bigger than just a family secret, he said, his voice low and deliberate. The architect didn't just raise him in secrecy, he molded him. Jacob was never meant to be a child. He was part of a project, something they were creating, and they were going to use him as the weapon that would give them control over everything: people, power, fear. Claire's throat tightened. A weapon? She whispered. The words seemed impossible, but she knew they weren't. The clues were all there, and everything that had been hidden was finally beginning to make sense. What happened to him then? Why wasn't I told? Why was I kept in the dark? The man took a step back, his eyes scanning the horizon as if weighing his next words. Because your father thought you could be saved. He kept you away from Jacob to protect you. He never wanted you to get involved in this. Because once you know about the architect, once you know what Jacob became, there's no going back. There's no safe place for you. Claire's heart hammered in her chest as the pieces of the puzzle finally started to fit together. The shadows in her father's workshop, the secret letters, the hidden notebooks, all of it pointed to one terrifying conclusion. Jacob had been made into something much more than a child, and now he was part of an empire that controlled not just lives, but the very essence of power itself. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. I don't understand. You're saying Jacob was created, turned into a weapon, but why? What's his purpose? The man let out a long, low breath. The architect's purpose was always control. He needed to create an army, and Jacob was his perfect candidate, but not just any army. An army of superior beings, people who could think, act, and fight with an intelligence and precision no one else could match. People who could take down governments, take down anything that stood in their way. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Jacob was the first experiment, and it worked. But the side effects? His voice faltered for a moment. The side effects were catastrophic. Claire's breath hitched. What side effects? The transformation, the man said grimly. The process was meant to enhance the brain, to make it stronger, to remove all weakness. It was supposed to make Jacob the perfect soldier, but in doing so, they lost control. The more they changed him, the more human he lost. His mind, his humanity, began to unravel. And now, he's no longer just a person. He's an entity, an unstoppable force. Claire took a step back, the ground beneath her feeling suddenly unstable. So he's a monster? The word tasted bitter on her tongue, but it was the only way to describe it. The man nodded slowly. Not a monster in the way you think, but he's not the boy you knew. He's something else entirely, a product of the architect's vision. And now, Jacob is hunting you, Claire. You're the last link to his past, and that makes you the only thing standing in his way. Claire's world tilted on its axis. Jacob, the brother she never knew, the brother she had believed dead, was not just a lost child. He was a weapon, a tool of destruction, and he was coming for her. She glanced at the man, her eyes narrowing. You said you knew where he was. Where is he now? The man's face darkened, his jaw tight with tension. Jacob's location is a secret, hidden deep in the heart of the architect's operations. I can get you close, but once you step into that world, there's no turning back. You'll be walking into a war zone, a place where your own survival isn't guaranteed. I don't care, Claire said, her voice filled with a determination that surprised even herself. I need to find him. I need to understand who he is now, what he's become. and I need to stop this. I need to stop him." The man hesitated, as if considering the consequences of Claire's words. "You won't be able to do this on your own. The architect's reach is long, and Jacob, he's not the same person you remember. He's not someone you can save. He's a weapon, Claire, and weapons don't have a soul." "But I don't care about saving him," Claire snapped, her eyes burning with a newfound fire. "I care about stopping him. I care about stopping whatever this is before it destroys everything." The man's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "Then we don't have much time. You're not just walking into the lion's den, you're walking into the heart of darkness itself. Once you face Jacob, there's no going back. You'll be fighting for your life and for the lives of everyone who's still out there." Claire's heart pounded in her chest as she nodded. "Then let's go, I'm ready." With one final glance at the pier, the man turned and began to walk toward a black car parked further down the dock. Claire followed him, the weight of the book still heavy in her hands, the uncertainty of what lay ahead pressing down on her every step. But there was no turning back now. There was only one path, and it led straight into the heart of darkness. And she wasn't going to stop until she found Jacob, until she confronted the monster he had become. The car sped through the streets, the headlights cutting through the night as Claire sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite piece together. Every part of her screamed to turn back, to escape the nightmare she'd been pulled into, but she couldn't. The truth had already pulled her too deep, and there was no going back now. The man beside her didn't speak as they drove, his face hidden in the shadows of the car. Claire had tried to ask him questions along the way, but he remained silent, only offering occasional grunts or nods, his attention focused entirely on the road ahead. Whatever he knew about Jacob, about the architect, it seemed to weigh on him as heavily as it did on Claire. But now she didn't have time to worry about his silence. She had to keep her mind focused. Jacob, her brother, her flesh and blood. The last piece of her family had been turned into a weapon, a tool of destruction by someone who saw people as nothing more than pawns in a game of power. And now that weapon was hunting her down. She glanced out the window, watching the darkened landscape pass by in a blur. The further they drove, the more the world seemed to slip away behind them. The buildings grew fewer, the roads darker, and the reality of the situation began to settle in. She was headed straight into the heart of it. The architect, a man or an idea, a network that controlled lives, manipulated people, destroyed families. Claire's mind kept returning to the same thought. How could someone create something so monstrous? But the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Power, control, manipulation, those things had no boundaries. And the architect wasn't just one man. He was the embodiment of all those things. Finally, the car slowed, pulling off the road and down a narrow gravel path that led into a thick forest. The trees loomed overhead like sentinels, casting long, dark shadows over the car as it navigated the winding trail. The further they went, the more isolated the world felt. Claire's pulse quickened. She could feel the danger, the weight of the world pressing in on her. They were getting closer. The man turned to her briefly. "This is it," he said, his voice cold. "Once we enter this area, there's no turning back. You understand?" Claire nodded, her throat dry. "I understand." They reached a clearing, and ahead of them, through the trees, Claire saw a massive structure rising from the ground. It was an old, decaying building, surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. The walls were tall and imposing, dark windows looking down on the earth below like hollow eyes. "Is this where Jacob is?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. The man didn't respond at first. Instead, he parked the car just outside the perimeter, the engine sputtering into silence. He turned to face her, his expression hard. "This is the heart of it," he said. "The architect's operations. This is where everything started, where everything will end." Claire's heart raced in her chest. Her brother, her lost, twisted brother, was somewhere inside this building, somewhere within the cold concrete walls that now loomed like a tomb. "Once we go in," the man warned, "it's no longer about finding Jacob, it's about surviving." Claire didn't hesitate. "I'm not going to run, I'm going in." The man gave her a long, appraising look, as if trying to decide if she was truly ready. Finally, he nodded. "All right, stay close, and whatever happens, don't try to fight him. You won't win. Jacob's too far gone." Claire swallowed, the weight of his words sinking deep into her chest. She couldn't think about that. She couldn't think about the possibility of failing. She had to face him. She had to know what had happened to her brother, and she had to stop it. With a quick motion, the man opened the door and stepped out into the night, disappearing into the shadows of the forest. Claire followed him, her feet crunching on the gravel beneath her as she made her way to the gate. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the oppressive quiet of the woods. As they reached the entrance, the man pressed a button hidden beneath a metal panel on the wall. A heavy, metallic sound echoed as the gate slowly creaked open, the entrance to the compound yawning before them. They stepped inside, and the world seemed to close in around them. The compound was sprawling, its vast expanse of concrete and steel stretching into the darkness. Claire's breath caught in her throat as she looked around. There were several buildings, all of them looming like silent sentinels, their windows dark and empty. The place felt like a ghost town, but there was a heavy, lingering presence in the air, something darker than silence. It was as though they were walking into the heart of a storm. The man led her through the complex, his footsteps sure and quick, his hand on the gun tucked into the waistband of his coat. Every turn they took felt like a step deeper into the belly of the beast, and Claire's gut twisted with dread. But she couldn't stop now. They reached a large steel door, its surface cold and unyielding. The man took a deep breath and turned to Claire. "This is it. Jacob's in there. You ready?" Claire nodded, her hands trembling, but a resolve stronger than ever. "I'm ready." The man pressed a button on the side of the door, and with a hiss of steam, it slid open. The dark hallway beyond was silent, the only sound the faint hum of machinery far below. Claire stepped inside, her pulse quickening as she looked around. The corridor seemed endless, stretching far into the unknown. But at the far end, she could make out a silhouette, a figure standing alone, waiting for them. Jacob. For a moment, Claire froze. The figure in the distance didn't move, didn't even seem to acknowledge their presence. And as Claire stepped closer, she realized that the figure standing there, still and silent, wasn't quite what she had expected. Jacob wasn't just her brother anymore. He was something far more terrifying. And the moment they locked eyes, Claire knew. There would be no turning back. Claire stood frozen, her eyes locked onto the figure at the far end of the hallway. The air between them hummed with an almost tangible tension. Jacob, her brother, the child she thought she had lost, now standing before her, but not the way she remembered, not the way she had hoped. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. His silhouette was still and silent, framed by the dim light at the end of the hallway. Claire's heart beat louder with every second that passed. The truth she had feared for so long was right in front of her. "Jacob," she whispered, barely able to hear her own voice over the pounding in her ears. He didn't respond. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Claire's fingers tightened around the leather-bound book in her hands. This was it, the moment she had been running toward. Her brother, or the twisted version of him that had been shaped by the hands of the architect, was standing before her. Finally, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. Claire felt her pulse spike as he took another step and another. His face remained obscured in the shadows, but his presence was undeniable. He was here. Jacob. Claire breathed again, but this time there was a tremor in her voice. "I'm not Jacob anymore," came a voice, his voice, but colder, harsher. "I haven't been for a long time." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her heart shattered at the words, but she couldn't look away. The man who stood before her, the brother she had dreamed of, was a stranger now. He stepped into the light, and Claire recoiled. His eyes were different, hard, cold, with none of the warmth she remembered from her childhood. There was an emptiness in his stare, a void that felt like it was swallowing everything around him. "Who are you?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jacob, or whatever he had become, smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it, only something dark and dangerous. "I'm the product of your father's mistakes. I'm what happens when you create a weapon instead of a person. And now I'm the one who holds the power. Not him, not you, just me." Claire's stomach churned as the realization hit her. The boy she had mourned, the brother she had lost, had been twisted beyond recognition. And he wasn't just a victim of the architect. He had become part of it. He was now its most dangerous creation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Claire's voice was trembling now, the weight of the truth suffocating her. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about him? About you?" Jacob took a step forward. "Because you weren't supposed to know, Claire. You weren't supposed to be a part of this world. You weren't supposed to be in the way. But you're here now, and you're going to learn the hard way. There is no escaping this." "Jacob," Claire's voice broke, "I want to help you. Please, you don't have to do this. I don't care what you've become. You're still my brother." For a brief moment, Claire saw something flicker in his eyes, a glimpse of the boy she once knew, a memory lost in the depths of the man he had become. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that cold, empty stare. "I'm not your brother anymore," Jacob said, his voice a quiet, detached whisper. "I'm the architect's creation. I'm the end of everything. And you're in my way." Before Claire could respond, Jacob's eyes flickered with a sudden intensity, and in the blink of an eye, he moved toward her, faster than she could react. Her body screamed for her to move, but her legs felt like lead. Fear gripped her heart as she felt the cold air rush past her, his hand nearly brushing her shoulder. In that moment, Claire understood. She wasn't facing a person anymore. She was facing a weapon, a mind warped by power and cruelty, and there was no reasoning with him. But she wasn't going to back down. She had come too far. For better or worse, she had to face this. With every ounce of strength she had, Claire swung the leather-bound book in her hands, aiming not at Jacob, but at the space between them. The force of her motion sent the book flying into the air, its pages scattering like leaves in the wind. Jacob stopped in his tracks, his gaze following the pages as they fluttered around them. "What's this?" he asked, his voice laced with derision. But there was something else in it too. A crack, a moment of hesitation. "It's the truth," Claire said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "And you can't hide from it anymore." Jacob's eyes narrowed. For a brief second, it felt as though he was considering her words. But then, the coldness returned, and he lifted his hand, the air around them shifting with a terrifying energy. "I don't need the truth," Jacob said, his voice colder than ice. "I am the truth now." In the blink of an eye, he lunged, but this time, Claire wasn't frozen. She wasn't paralyzed by fear. She had come to terms with the fact that the brother she had known was gone, replaced by something else. And in that moment, with everything on the line, she made a decision. She ran. The world exploded into chaos as Claire sprinted down the hallway, adrenaline coursing through her veins. The sound of Jacob's footsteps echoed behind her, growing louder, faster. He was relentless, but so was she. The truth, the weight of it all, was now in her hands, and she wasn't going to let him win. In the distance, she could see the exit, the light beckoning her like a lifeline. But would she make it out alive? Would the truth destroy them all?